In October of 1997, a 15-year-old boy named John Hartman was beaten to death on the streets of Fairbanks, Alaska. 4 young men, 3 of them Athabascan Indians, were convicted of his murder. Yet years later, the case remains open and unsolved. Who's responsible? And how many killers were out on the streets that night? Was racism to blame for these convictions? I'm your host, Matt Ralston, and this is the story of John Hartman and the Fairbanks 4, case of murder on ice.
As the Fairbanks 4 sat in prison, with many in the community believing them to be innocent, their cases had stalled. Their prospects for a new trial, based on irregularities in the initial trials, such as the manufactured boot exhibit or the reliability of Arlo Olson's implausible testimony, were dwindling. In 2015, Marvin Roberts, the frontman who had spent 16 years in prison, won parole. He never admitted guilt. He'd been convicted at 19 years old. He was now 35, a full-grown man. All those birthdays spent behind bars. Eugene, George, and Kevin remained in prison, with sentences of 38 to 77 years. Marvin's release was a welcome sight in the community, but those in the corner of the Fairbanks 4 did not take his parole as anything more than a minor victory in the larger cause. They wanted all 4 men freed. They wanted them exonerated, an admission of their innocence.
Friends and family sang and danced to celebrate the release of Marvin Roberts. Roberts is one of the so-called Fairbanks 4, men whose convictions for the 1997 beating death of 15-year-old John Hartman have long been questioned. The 3 others, fellow Alaska natives George Fries and Eugene Venn, and American Indian Kevin Peace, remain jailed. The interior Alaska Native community has increased support for the Fairbanks 4 in recent years, something the 37-year-old Roberts recognized in brief comments at the weekend event.
A lot of times in prison, I would try to think of what I would say, like in a situation like this. And now that I'm here, I can't think of nothing. So. But no, on behalf of George, Eugene, and Kevin, and myself and our families, it's from the bottom of our hearts, we just want to say thank you to all of you.
Roberts has been in a halfway house in Fairbanks since last week after transitioning from prisons where he spent the last 17-plus years. Speaking at the Saturday event, Tanana Chiefs Conference President Victor Joseph reflected on the bittersweet feelings of many.
As much as we're glad that Marvin's home, this fight isn't over with. It's not over with yet. Not until all the young men are home, when they are exonerated, when their hearts are free from this bad way that they've been put away. They locked them up. They need to be home free. And when they're exonerated, that's when they'll be free.
Suddenly, an affidavit appeared out of nowhere. Well, not exactly out of nowhere, but some guy, a convicted murderer, had come forward and said that he and his friends had been responsible for beating John Hartman to death. According to William Holmes, a local Fairbanks guy now in prison in California for a separate murder, he was out driving around town that night with 4 friends. Holmes, as well as the rest of these friends, are black guys. They all attended Lathrop High School in Fairbanks. Of the 5 guys in the car, all would go on to have criminal careers, and 3 of them would go on to become convicted murderers years later. The friends' names are Jason Wallace, Rashawn Brown, Marquez Pennington, and Shelmar Johnson. Their aim that night was to beat up drunk natives, in Holmes' words. According to Holmes, he met up with his 4 buddies at a party that night. He was bored and didn't want to stay long because, quote, nobody was putting out. Charming. The guys got into Holmes' car, and his 4 friends ended up stomping Hartman to death, with Holmes serving as the getaway driver. He says his friend Jason Wallace, also a future convicted murderer, had simply lost it, gone crazy, saw red. Holmes says the plan was to knock Hartman out and go through his pockets. Not anything this serious. That Jason Wallace just went psycho and continued stomping Hartman's lifeless body long after the others had ceased the beating. This would jibe with later events. See, over 5 years after the alleged incident with John Hartman, in January of 2003, a 25-year-old woman was murdered in her apartment just outside of Fairbanks. The weapon of choice was a hammer. Her apartment was then set on fire. 22-year-old Jason Wallace, a skinny guy with a sly grin on his face, was arrested at the Fairbanks International Airport, attempting to fly to Washington State, but was detained. He was detained because he smelled strongly of gasoline. His beanie was all burnt and singed, and he had burns on his face and on one hand. He soon confessed to killing this woman and torching her apartment, and admitted to recently stabbing someone in the neck with a screwdriver in an attempted murder. The victim survived. 3 days before her murder, on Christmas Eve, this woman's boyfriend, also 25 years old, was found dead, shot in the head and laying on the side of Interstate 5 near Redding, California, thousands of miles away. Half a mile down the road, his accomplice was found in the same state, dead, shot in the head, discarded on the side of the highway. This guy was related to the guy that Jason Wallace had stabbed in the neck with a screwdriver back in Fairbanks in a failed murder attempt. A short distance away, a rental car was found. It had been set on fire, and it was traced to William Holmes. Holmes would soon be arrested for the murder of these 2 friends / drug dealing accomplices at the Tacoma, Washington home of his friend Jason Wallace, who'd already been arrested at the airport back in Fairbanks. In short, the pair's plan was to travel from Alaska to Washington State and pull off a $70,000 ecstasy deal. They would simply kill everyone involved in the deal in Washington, keep the drugs and the money, and then kill everyone in Fairbanks who knew the pair were drug dealers or knew about the plot. This would prove to be a difficult task, as Holmes was one of the most well-known drug dealers in Fairbanks and had a side hustle as a rapper, where he often rapped about dealing drugs and killing people. But it's unclear if he intended to kill everyone who listened to his music. Holmes was a big, stocky dude, and his rap name was Dollar B. You know, because his name's William, like Bill, for the B, and Dollar, because he wanted to make a lot of dollars.
Sometimes my mind just be off this murderous shit, so I gotta drop murdering hits, or I'ma start serving these clips to these bitch ass niggas that love running they lips. Fuck around with B, that'll get your snitch ass clipped. We mind real deep, I roll with niggas to creep through the window while you trying to sleep. Start letting off rounds of all types of heat, so if you catch me out mobbing, I'm disturbing the peace, smashing on police.
Aside from the obvious focus on murder, he says he rolls with creeping outside your window while you're trying to sleep. See, Holmes had a son with a woman named Mahogany Davis. And before he and Jason Wallace were arrested for their drug deal and murder plot in 2003, she was found brutally stabbed to death in her Fairbanks apartment. Although her wounds were stabs, they did not appear to be from a knife, but probably from a tool of some sort. Remember, Jason Wallace was arrested in 2003 for killing a separate woman in her home with a hammer and attacking and stabbing another man in his home with a screwdriver. So this would appear to fit a pattern. The slain woman, Mahogany Davis, was William Holmes' ex-girlfriend and mother to his son. Her murder is unsolved, and her family believes she was killed by William Holmes, or that Holmes sicked Jason Wallace on her because she had information about them, either about upcoming drug deals, their involvement with John Hartman's murder, or any number of other crimes. Sickeningly, William Holmes' Dollar B album was dedicated to the memory of Mahogany Davis. The guy who grew up with William Holmes said that Holmes was actually a cool guy. This would kind of make sense because his demeanor is not that of a psychotic murderer. He's calm, seemingly introspective, polite even. This friend says that Holmes changed, that he just took the movie State Property to heart, took it seriously. I didn't know what State Property is, but it's a movie that stars a bunch of rappers. It was released in 2002. Here's the summary. Frustrated with being broke, Beans decides that the only way to grasp the American dream is to take it. State Property follows Beans and his crew as they take over the city, creating mayhem as their empire builds. Beans now struggles to maintain his family life while bumping heads with the opposing gangsters and the police. It all comes to a head when he cannot surpass the city's most notorious crew, run by Untouchable J. It has a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Also, together in the car that same night with William Holmes and Jason Wallace was Rashawn Brown. Rashawn Brown is also a murderer, but his murders are totally separate from the unrelated murders of William Holmes and Jason Wallace. In December of 1999, Rashawn Brown had moved from Fairbanks to Oregon to live with his father after a series of emotional outbursts. He met up one night with an 18-year-old man and a 19-year-old woman in an effort to steal both their drugs and their money. Sounds familiar. He shot both victims at close range and left their bodies where they fell. Then he threw the bicycle he'd arrived on in a dumpster and reported it stolen. He then went to the home of an acquaintance and offered him $20 to tell police he had been with them all night. Eventually, several witnesses pointed to his being at the scene of the crime. Blood from the victims was found on his underwear, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The underwear thing could be noteworthy. See, that party that the five guys were at the night that John Hartman was murdered, a lot of people identified Rashawn Brown as being there because he was wearing leopard print underwear, and he was drunk and passed out. His underwear was showing, and people were pointing and laughing at him. I don't know how noteworthy this is, but just thought I should mention it. And never trust a guy that wears leopard print underwear. The other two guys in the car, Marquez Pennington and Shelmar Johnson, have been convicted of violent crimes as well. Pennington has been arrested over 30 times. So this is who William Holmes says was in his company the night John Hartman was fatally assaulted. He had written a letter detailing all of this, and it had been faxed to the Fairbanks Police Department. The letter was dated 2012. The public, all the people claiming the Fairbanks Four were innocent all those years, didn't see it until 2015. How is that possible, you may ask? The letter was discovered and brought to light by perhaps the most unlikely of actors, fellow cops, Alaska State Troopers. This part of the story is complex, but I'll do my best to explain it. William Holmes, while being locked up in California for his murders there, had become something of a follower of Jesus Christ. He spent a lot of time in the prison library, which was next to the chapel, where he was frequently overseen by a corrections officer named Joseph Torquato. Torquato was a fellow Christian and served as something of a mentor to William Holmes. One day the two were talking, just having a conversation, and according to Torquato, Holmes said something to him about knowing these four guys in Alaska who were in prison, innocent, accused of killing a boy. Torquato did some basic internet research and realized that Holmes' story more or less made sense. Torquato, being a Christian, told Holmes he should come forth with this information, but Holmes told him he had no intention of further pursuing the matter, that this was just a private conversation. But Torquato pushed him. If he was a real Christian, he should man up, not allow four innocent people to suffer. So Holmes wrote this letter confessing to his involvement in the murder, and Torquato turned it over to his supervisor, who wrote up a memo and faxed the letter to who they figured were the appropriate authorities on the subject, the Fairbanks Police Department. There, a detective at the Fairbanks PD got the letter and took it to the district attorney's office, and the DA deemed it not worthy of following up on, and so the letter sat and sat and sat in a drawer. Not worthy of following up on. A guy with 2 murder convictions confessing to his involvement in a murder. Interesting. Marvin Roberts, while serving his prison time in Alaska, had heard rumblings around the prison grapevine that Jason Wallace, the Hammer Killer, also serving time in Alaska for murder, might have said a few things about William Holmes being involved in the murder of John Hartman. And this prompted Marvin to write a letter to William Holmes, which was ignored, thrown away. Marvin was being represented by an attorney with the Alaska Innocence Project, an operation which has only one attorney. And this guy had also attempted to contact Holmes in prison by phone. Quite some time passed. Yet, as Torquato's words ran through his head, something, the human spirit, his own self-interest, a chemical change in his brain function, convinced Holmes that he should finally come clean. And he was able to get this lawyer named Bill Oberly's phone number. He called him. He told him his version of the events that night. This lawyer, Bill Oberly, and a colleague journeyed from their base in Anchorage, Alaska, to Calipatria Prison in Eastern California and got Holmes to sign a sworn affidavit, culpability for the murder of John Hartman. Soon, in September of 2013, Bill Oberly, surrounded by lawyers, Native activists, and supporters of the Fairbanks Four, was on the steps of a courthouse announcing that the Fairbanks Four had been granted something called a post-conviction relief hearing. Here, they would have a chance to have this new evidence, the affidavit, considered, effectively giving them a new trial, the chance to be released and exonerated. Yet that affidavit that was obtained from William Holmes was completely separate from the letter he had written, and that letter just sat in a drawer at the Fairbanks Police Department.
An afternoon press conference here at the Rabinowitz Courthouse downtown brought the kind of blockbuster revelation that supporters of the Fairbanks Four have been praying for more than a decade: a confession.
This individual, William Holmes, and 4 other individuals, none of whom were the members of the Fairbanks Four. So based on that information, we have filed a pleading asking for a new trial for these men and for a claim of, or a finding of actual innocence.
This has been 16 years of a nightmare for me. And this is the happiest day of my life. Well, when they come home, it'll be the happiest. But for right now, you can't imagine how happy I am.
At the courthouse, friends and family closed with a prayer that nearly 16 years later, the men known as the Fairbanks Four will finally see justice.
Father, we call upon those given legal authority to act now, for the night's over and daylight's coming. Father, we call upon those who are guilty of this action. The light's coming, and there's no place to hide.
I'm Tom Hewitt for News 13.
The hearing would not begin until October of 2015, over 2 years later. By then, Marvin Roberts had been paroled. The state of Alaska appointed a seasoned prosecutor, a state attorney named Adrian Bachman, to handle their side of things. A graduate of UCLA and USC law, she had been serving as a prosecutor in Alaska since 1980. She was seen as tough, unforgiving even. She had once been accused of negligence in attempting to secure a conviction in a case she was working, perhaps intentional negligence. She was accused of this not by someone being charged with a crime, no, by a judge in the case who stated, while the exact mix of intentional negligence and negligent misconduct may never be ascertained, there can be no doubt that much of the wrongdoing was accomplished knowingly. And then she revealed a shocking lack of awareness of the legal and ethical responsibilities of her position. She would eventually go on to become the district attorney of Anchorage, the biggest city in Alaska. So, yeah. Bachman appointed 2 former Alaska state troopers to review the police work in the initial investigations of the Fairbanks Four all those years earlier. Basically, a 2-person ad hoc committee. These guys had spent time in the troopers' cold case unit and were familiar with the John Hartman case. The plan was for them to share their findings with the state, but these troopers never ended up testifying for the state of Alaska. They were eventually called as witnesses by the Fairbanks Four to back up the case of police misconduct. They were the ones who found that letter sitting in a drawer. Here it is, dated October 8th, 2012. During the weekend in 1997, I received a page on my pager from a girl I went to Lathrop High School with. She told me to come over to an apartment she was at with another girlfriend. I'm not positive of the time, but I remember it was already dark outside. Then me and my friend Shelmar Johnson went over to the apartment from my mother's home in Birchwood
on Fort Wainwright Army Base. The female did not mention it, but upon arrival I saw 3 other boys I knew from school. Marquise, I don't know his last name, Rashawn Brown, and Jason Wallace. We all stayed for about an hour and decided to go downtown to have some fun. At 17 years old, we were all in 11th grade. On no more than 5 other occasions, different friends and I had pulled up in a car, went downtown, and harassed drunk natives by throwing eggs at them. Or 2 or 3 guys with the driver still in the car would jump out with the driver still in the running vehicle and punch him. We'd laugh at them falling or a cigarette flying out of their mouth upon impact. The thrill came from running away, speeding off and messing with these drunks, barely able to walk. The 5 of us left in my maroon red Ford Tempo. Once in downtown Fairbanks, we saw 2 or 3 Native American males who looked intoxicated. The 4 teenagers with me jumped into my car to chase them, but the natives ran into a dark alley. So the 4 friends of mine came running back to my car. While driving by the alley, we saw at least 10 grown Native men looking at us drive by, and my friends realized they'd made a wise decision. After 20 minutes of patrolling downtown, we decided to head back to the female's apartment. While at a stop sign or red light, awaiting to turn left to hit Airport Way, we saw a white boy walking alone from the direction of Airport Way. We all get excited and say, "We got one!" I pull up across the street and stop abruptly. Jason Wallace, Marquise, Shelmar Johnson all jump out of the car running to the right, down the street I had just crossed. I could no longer see the white boy or them due to some high bushes or trees. I pulled forward to turn the car around. I turn around and open my door. Before I could get out, I look up and see all them running full speed, telling me to go, go. They all get in the car. I pull to the road, turn right, and cross Airport Way, driving by the pawn shop, heading to the south side. Jason Wallace is in the passenger seat. The other 3 guys are in the back seat yelling hysterically. I asked them what happened, and they all 3 simultaneously that upon knocking the boy down, Wallace began stomping him repeatedly until they kept yelling, "All right, Jay, that's enough." I tried to question Wallace about what the hell he was thinking, but he was silent. Upset, I dropped everybody off at their homes and went home myself. That following school day, I believe it to be a Monday, Wallace approached me very nervous and shaky. He pulled me over to a corner alone, handing me a newspaper and pointing to an article. I looked and thought nothing, even though it said a body was found dead. Then he pointed to the street, and I think it said Barnett or something like that. And that location sounded an alarm in my head, and I immediately locked eyes with them, realizing it was the same person from that night. Panicked, I told him to leave the other 3 guys to me to talk to, and for him to act as if that night never happened. Individually, I spoke to Shelmar Johnson, Marquise, and Rashad Brown. I told all 3 to tell no one about that night. Also that the person was dead and act like that night never happened. The following day, or during the week, Jason showed me another newspaper saying there was an arrest and confessions, maybe by some natives. I spoke one more time individually to Shelmar Johnson, Marquise, and Rashawn Brown, telling them that night never existed, even amongst ourselves. I never spoke about that night to either of them ever again. Vividly, I remember Marquise telling me that night he was digging through the boy's pockets and Wallace was stomping him. While stomping him, Marquise said he could feel the boy shaking. All of a sudden, the shaking stopped. I did speak to Wallace one night, and he told me he had blood on his shoes from that night, so he burned them and his clothes up. From 1998 to 2002, it came up twice between Jason and I. Nothing in depth, only that we had history and had gotten away with it. Mentally, I lived as if that night never happened. I did see the guy cross the street, and he fit the photos I saw of John Hartman. This is all to the best of my recollection. William Holmes. Here's an interview I did with Holmes Corrections Officer Joseph Torquato. A couple things. First of all, this guy deserves a presidential medal of some sort, and I desperately want to be friends with him, although that will never happen. You might notice that I'm not all boned up on the facts in this interview, and Torquato's helping me through it. I recorded this before I became an expert on this case. Be advised, this audio quality is really poor. What happened was I forgot to plug the microphone in. Would you mind introducing yourself and how you came to be involved with the William Holmes fiasco?
Okay, I'm Joseph Torquato. At the time, I was a correctional officer at Fairbanks State Prison. Holmes was an inmate there. He worked for me. And we talked. And during the course of time, he eventually told me about this murder that happened. I did some research because, a lot of people tell you a lot of different things. And it seemed that it was true. When I came back and I hit him up on it, based on his actions and everything, but it seemed very, very legit. And I thought he was going to come forward because he claimed to be a Christian. He was, he was with the Christian people going to the church and everything. And at first he said no. I didn't know what to do. So I went to my supervisor. The captain explained what was going on, and then we made a memo and sent it to Fairbanks Police Department. My captain's the one that, handled the faxing of the memo to Fairbanks.
And he was working for you in a library, and it was a chapel as well. Is that what I read?
Well, I was the education officer, and I also oversaw the chapel. So at first he was in the chapel working, and he was a good worker. So when a position opened up in education as a porter, he came over as my porter.
And you eventually developed, you spent a lot of time together, and that he was working under you, and, you're an officer. What was your impression of him? Because I've seen him in an interview, and I've seen him on the stand, and he seems very calm, and yet, he obviously murdered a few people. So what was your impression of his demeanor?
Just a regular guy. It ain't he just makes some big wrong choices. A person's a person. But sometimes they make wrong choices. And if the choice is so wrong, they get incarcerated. But, and, by the time I met him, he was already changing.
So you have a strong Christian faith, from what I understand. And was Holmes, was that something that he had developed as you knew him, or because you guys came to talk about religion and you eventually confronted him on how to act as a Christian. Would I be accurate in saying that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's Skillow because he would go to the chapel. You know, they have services there. And if you're going to represent as a Christian, you got to go all the way. We're all works in progress, you know?
And so you persuaded him, you said, paraphrasing, obviously, if you want to act as a Christian, you shouldn't be responsible for having people locked up who shouldn't be. Is that about right?
Well, I attempted to persuade him. I said, you know, you got to do the right thing, because when he told me this, and then I checked, and then I got back to him, and by, you know, our interactions and everything, I believe that he was 100% true on what he was telling me. Then I said, oh, well, you know, I'll hook you up with the right people, which would be our squad. They document your stuff. And he said, no, I'm never going to tell nobody. I should have never told you. I have never told nobody before. And I was in shock a little bit. And I didn't know what to do, because I felt very, my stomach was bleeding for a few days on that one, because figuring out what to do, because he wasn't going to come forward. That's why we did the memo. We did the memo without him agreeing to come forward. And that's why we did the memo, because he didn't agree to come forward. But, you know, you can't force somebody to do something they don't want.
So you had heard this from him, and would it be fair, you probably hear a bunch of stuff and you don't know what's true or not, and then you actually, it made enough sense to you that you researched it and connected enough dots that you said, wow, I actually believe that he was involved in this murder.
Yeah, see, because, and I think I said in the interview, I said it somewhere, but at the time, you know, we were talking and stuff, and I was reading the book of the 5 families, so, about the Italian mob on the East Coast, and he had read it. We were discussing it back and forth and stuff, and that's why I always asked him why he could trust Jason Wallace, because, you know, Jason Wallace turned on him. Now, eventually he told me about the murder that happened when they were in high school, and everybody kept their mouth shut. And that's why he trusted them, because they had long history.
Right. And so in looking at any motivation that Holmes would have had to make this up, you know, just to kind of play devil's advocate, people have said, you know, Jason, even though Holmes was loyal to Jason Wallace, that Wallace did testify against Holmes. He rolled over on him pretty much right away. So in your view, is there any way this could have been a chance for William Holmes to get back at Jason by implicating him in this murder?
I mean, you know, anything is possible, but the likelihood of that being actual was minute, in my opinion, based on how he told me, based on his reaction. You know, because in corrections, you get paid for reading people too. You know, that's part of your job. Read the situation, read people. And when we talked, he was telling me the truth. I believe. That's why we did what we did.
Yeah. So Holmes was a life without parole inmate. LWOP? Is that the lingo? Okay. LWOP.
Yeah. He was an LWOP or a double LWOP?
Yeah, I guess he was a double LWOP.
Yeah.
So during this time, there was some shifting in the law of how prisoners were housed. And before,
I guess the LWAP guys were, they had no chance in moving around as much, and something changed for funding that they were able to drop their points and go down to a level 3. Does that ring a bell at all?
Yeah. I mean, Holmes, I think, is level 2 now.
So with that's just more comfortable accommodations, less security, more freedom to move around, basically. Is that right?
Yeah, more freedom to move around. But I'm right now, I'm talking as a private citizen. Like I said, I was retired. Because if I was part of CDC, I couldn't speak to you because we have protocols. But I believe even any lifers that go to a level 2 got to be in a secured, more or less they got to have the fence around there. They're still secured. It's just they have more freedom. Different sleeping arrangements, stuff like that. It varies.
I would imagine that's a big deal to a lot of these guys. They don't have a lot else to work for or look forward to.
No, and before, LWAPs couldn't go below a level 4. But like you said, the point system changed. Well, actually, a lot of, right now, because I've been checking things just because I got the time, and a lot of people have been getting out. Because they also changed that. At one time, murderers almost never got out.
So could Holmes in any way, theoretically get out?
Maybe theoretically, but practically, no. He's a double LWAP.
I see.
I mean,
So he tells you this. You start looking into it. You believe it's real. And this bothers you a lot. Would a lot of COs have done this? Or was that going above and beyond your duty to actually follow up on this?
I don't know. I can't speak for others. I mean, it's just something I always done. If somebody tells you something that, especially when other people are incarcerated for it, I think you got a moral obligation, if nothing else, to check it out.
Yeah, I would think so. So you've had other instances where you may have helped get information to the right party?
Well, I've had other things where somebody tells me about a murder. We talk about it back and forth. Then I check it on the internet, and you can't find nothing about it. He said the murder happened, they say the murder happened here. And I you look in papers, and either they got all the details wrong, or, they're just fabricating stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. So there was some stuff written about John Hartman, a fair amount. So you just read all of it and you thought it made enough sense.
Yeah, because he told me about it. I went on, checked it, and it seemed true. Then, like I told, I came back and I talked to him. And I said either John or Hartman, I don't know which one. But he finished the name for me without missing a beat.
Right.
And it was that, that smug type thing, which I know,
And so you documented this through your means within the prison. But what was the process of getting William Holmes to admit it? He had been called to testify, and he said that he was going to essentially not say anything about it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I thought he was going to say something. And he says, no. He told me no. He said, remember, I just told you. We were discussing the book and everything. And I said, I really don't even know why he told you per se, but I'm never going to tell nobody again when we had an agreement. when they were young kids, that they never happened and how he's going to do it. And I talked to him a few times and he still refused to come forward. So I did my memo, right? Then later on, I don't know how much farther down, but then later on, he comes in and asks for the Alaska projects with Bill Overly.
So he had received, from what I understand, a letter at some point from Marvin Roberts, who's one of the Fairbanks Four.
Yes.
And then
I didn't know that part.
Okay, so he was just asking how to get in touch with the Alaska Innocence Project, basically?
Yes, so I asked my supervisor that I went to for the memo. And he said, just tell him to go to the law library. So I couldn't, the guy couldn't give him the number, even though you think it's for a good cause and everything, there's limit on what you can do. So I told him just go to the law library and get it. But I guess he got it. And then when he was going to, do the affidavit and everything, I guess it's because that letter from whoever it was. But I guess that is what actually, changed them. We'll say. Which, says, okay, I'm going to come forward. Because they didn't know nothing about my memo. Innocent Project in Alaska.
Oh, just get like the phone number and stuff. I see.
Yeah, just for the phone number for Overly. Yeah, he wanted his number.
Okay.
When he wanted his number, I said, oh, you're coming forward. I said, I asked him, did they mention the memo? He said, no, this has nothing to do with the memo. I didn't know at the time that the guy had written them. The Indian.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that, but later, when everything came out, and in my opinion, that's what moved him to come forward and testify.
I see. And so when you realized that things were happening in this case, that's when you had your memo faxed to the Fairbanks Police Department. Is that right?
No. My memo was faxed right away.
Okay.
When he refused to come forward, I did a memo and we faxed it to the Fairbanks Police Department. And it's like 6 months later or longer. I guess he gets a letter from one of the Fairbanks Four, and he decides to do an affidavit. And then he starts all that in motion, but the two had nothing to do with each other.
I see. Yeah, so what you faxed there, your memo, the Fairbanks Police Department ignored that, and I guess you didn't really follow up because you had a lot of other stuff to do, and it wasn't discovered until, if you didn't know the background, I'm sure you do, but that troopers McFerrin and Gallen, they were brought in to help oversee this whole investigation, and they're the ones that found your memo and brought it to the attention of everyone. It had just been put in a drawer. So the Fairbanks Four would have to thank those two guys and yourself, you for having the diligence to document it and fax it, and those two guys for treating it like it should have been as an important document,
Yeah, but I think the guy that had the memo, because I read on it, right? And the guys that had the memo, when this broke open with Holmes testifying and everything, when this broke open, he brought it to the light, saying, oh, well, we got this memo here. came in and interviewed me. They interviewed my captain or my ex-captain, and they went and interviewed Holmes. But I believe a memo was brought forth by the police department, but it was after the fact. And, you know, they had their excuses.
So you must have felt like you did a real service, or did you just look at it as that's part of your job?
I considered it a good part of my job.
Here's William Holmes in an interview with Fairbanks television journalist Stephanie Woodard, in which he discusses his ascent into a life of crime, his murder spree with Jason Wallace, and his decision to come forward with information about the John Hartman killing and what may or may not have motivated him to do this.
Take me down that dark road. How did you get there?
Well, I mean, for me, some people may not look at weed as, you know, they say it's a gateway drug, but for me, weed was the beginning of my downfall. I started hanging around a different crowd once I started smoking weed. I started, you know, that was really, I started hanging around a different crowd. I got introduced to the drug world. I began to sell weed. So at the same time, it was like I was juggling two different worlds. On one hand, you know, I had kids at a young age. I had my kids. I love my kids, but I began to be addicted to weed. So initially, it was just I would do anything to provide for my weed habit, and it began to lead into robbing people, stealing from people, burglarizing houses, and that's how I began to go down that road, and then it just got worse and worse.
But the money in it, is that kind of something, tell me about that, because you said provide for your habit, but were you also providing for your family? Like what was that situation?
Well, in the beginning, it was just about getting high off marijuana. Then eventually, probably once I would say I turned like 19 or 20, then it began about trying to provide for my family or just provide for the lifestyle. So it just began. It wasn't until I started delving into selling cocaine that things really spiraled out of control. But around 2001, when I started selling cocaine, that's when I just upped the ante, because I know in that world that, you know, if either you got to be willing to protect yourself or people are going to prey on you. So I began robbing people, robbing other drug dealers. Just if anybody crossed me or had a problem with what I was doing, then I was always willing to take it to the max. And even though up to that point I hadn't killed anybody, I think most people knew that I was willing to use my gun. So it just, once I entered the dope game, it just got worse. Well, I mean, back in the day, I was very manipulative. A lot of people, they knew the good side of me, and I would use that against people. I would gain their trust, then I would rob them or steal from them and things like that. So it's a lot of people out there that they don't really probably understand how I ended up here, because the Bill they knew was a person that was kind, loving, friendly, and that was a part of me. But once I got involved in drug dealing, the mentality I had was that in order to be on top in the drug game, you had to be the most ruthless. So I chose to be, instead of being the prey, I chose to be the predator, and I took that to the max. When I came back, I began to sell cocaine. I robbed somebody, and in that house, I thought there was only weed, but there ended up being cocaine. And from there, I just started selling cocaine. And once I started selling cocaine, man, it just took me into another world. So I was just robbing people. I was making a lot more money. I began to be a lot more flashier, and I just think it just all went to my head. I stopped caring about, to me, when you go down that dark road, it makes you more callous. So I stopped caring about friends. I started robbing friends, and I just stopped caring. And that's, to me, once you go down that road, that's what happens to you. You start becoming more and more immune to the things you're doing.
I want to touch, we're going to come to the Fairbanks 4, obviously, but one of the things that seems to be the crux of the state, right, is, of their case, is you were put up on trial for killing 2 people. And they keep pressuring you, asking you, you know, why didn't you use the information that we'll get into, what you know, against the other people in that case to get you a lesser sentence?
A lot of people are probably wondering what happened. As far as me and Hakeem, we were both heavily into the drug game. We eventually became somewhat of partners, and basically there was an incident that took place where he lost a lot of cocaine, and he ended up having less money than me, let's just say it. So there was a lot of, I heard he was talking about me behind my back, and I held a lot of resentments for that anger. I felt like he double-crossed me. So when I did meet up with Jason Watts, that's when we put together the plan to rob Hakeem. So Christopher Martin, he really had nothing to do with it. He was just somebody where I wasn't gonna leave any witnesses, but that's how I got to a place where I could murder somebody, was because it was a lot of resentments and anger, and I felt like he betrayed my trust. So that's how I got to that place.
Take me to your mentality that day. What is it like for you to pull that trigger?
Well, honestly, when I met back up with Jason Wallace in 2002, it was like me and him were like dynamite. If I don't believe I would ever fully got to that place without him. But when we met back up and he was crazy, by then I was crazy. So it was like we put together this plan. But as far as me, what I did in California, I mean, I pumped myself up. Once I was down there, I did feel like, well, we're in this together. He's expecting me to take care of these guys and get the money, and I'm expecting him to make sure that nobody's able to say that I came on the trip. So I think once I left Alaska, it was like I felt like, man, I gotta do it. You know, we boys, me and him was tight. So I looked at it like he was counting on me. I said I was gonna do it. So yeah, I just pumped myself up. Before I did it, I really just like looked in the mirror like, man, I'm about to do this. And things just lined up to where it just so happened that night, I was actually driving, and when Christopher Martin asked me to drive, because he had drove all the way from Washington to California, I was thinking, okay, I'm gonna do this. And we stopped at a rest stop. When I came out, he was in the back seat, and that was like his way of telling me to drive. So I thought, man, this ain't gonna happen, because if we go all the way to California, I'm not gonna do it. So as we were driving, probably about 45 minutes, he said, pull over, he had to use the bathroom. And when we pulled over, he got out and used the bathroom. Then I got out and used the bathroom. And then he just went and sat in the front seat because he said I was driving too slow. And that's when I got in the back seat and I shot Hakeem in the back of the head first, one shot. And then I shot Chris till he stopped. He hollered when I shot Hakeem, and I just kept shooting him until he stopped hollering.
In the head? Hakeem was in the driver's seat and the other guy was in the passenger seat?
No, Hakeem was in the passenger seat. I sat right behind him as I was getting in, and I didn't shut my door. I just put the gun in the back of the headrest and shot him.
And so then what? You're alone in the car.
No, I pulled Christopher Martin out the car and just left him on the side of the road, and then I drove probably like a quarter or half a mile with Hakeem sitting right there, and then I pulled him out the car and I drove and stopped at a hotel for about 30, 45 minutes, and I turned around and came back all the way to Washington. And
with Hakeem in the car?
No. I had already pulled him out the car. But yeah, then I called Michonne Wallace, who came and picked me up and was just, Jason didn't tell her what we were doing, but he told her to do whatever I said.
Have you ever thought about like Hakeem's family?
Yeah, of course. I've thought about Hakeem's family. I've thought about his wife. Not very many people speak about her because she didn't live in Fairbanks, and I don't think she wanted anything to do with it outside of, I remember her contacting the newspaper and telling them that Tika wasn't his girl or his wife, she was, but I knew them. I knew his wife. I went to school with her. So me and her were friends. So I always just think about the fact that, you know, for her to know me and to think that I could do this to her husband and somebody else I knew, I know I know it's crushed her, and she don't even. I remember seeing somewhere where the police asked her, "Do you know Bill Holmes?" and she said no. And I felt like even though she knew me, in her mind she's thinking, "I don't even know that guy."
Is this the first time that you've talked about Hakeem and stuff? Like that when you told me that?
This is the first time I've ever admitted to anybody that I killed them. I ain't never admitted that to nobody.
You didn't admit that in trial?
Absolutely not.
Next, Holmes addressed the Fairbanks 4 case, to which he's the center of, after penning a confession that alleged it was him and his group of friends who were responsible for the 1997 murder of Fairbanks teen John Hartman.
Is there any question that those 4 guys killed John Hartman in your mind?
No, there's no doubt in my mind. The people responsible for John Hartman losing his life is the 5 guys that I mentioned, including me. The person that killed John Hartman is Jason Wallace. He stomped him out. He told me he stomped him out. He knows it. Marquez knows it. Shelmar Johnson knows it. And Rashawn Brown knows it. And I know it. Plain as that.
Well, there you have it, people. Stay away from marijuana. First thing you're smoking a joint, and next thing you know, you're executing people on the side of Interstate 5. Is that what you want? I'm going to play you out with a song called Dear Dad by William Holmes, or Dollar B. It's about an absentee father. Ironic now that William Holmes' son, whose mother has been murdered, also now has an absentee father who sits behind bars. Holmes Corrections Officer Joseph Torquato said that this is the song Holmes is most proud of. We'll get into the evidentiary hearing of the Fairbanks 4, as well as William Holmes' beef with Jason Wallace, and why he may or may not be motivated as a snitch. Next time on Murder on Ice, the story of John Hartman and the Fairbanks 4. Thank you so much to Joseph Torquato. If you have any information about these crimes, email me, alaskapodcast@gmail.com, or contact your local law enforcement. Follow us on Instagram, Murder on Ice, on Twitter, Murder on Ice. Follow me on Twitter, the Matt Ralston, on Instagram, the Matt Ralston. And please take time to tell a friend about this podcast and to rate and review it on iTunes. Oh yeah, written and produced by me, Matt Ralston. Music by Arla Sanders.
Dear Dad, as I write you on this pen and pad, I want to tell you some of the thoughts that I done had. Like where did it all go bad? Used to just make me laugh. Now I just reminisce on the past. That's all I got. The good times, there wasn't a lot. I got tension inside that stays boiling hot. Some things in life I don't understand. Like the last chance for you to lend a helping hand, and you turned your back. What kind of shit was that? You proved all my bad thoughts were really facts. Don't make me go back to way back when. I got horrific memories that play again and again in the back of my mind. Time after time, I got a permanent chill that stays in my spine, and I'm feeling it in every line of this rhyme. And you don't even see it, you must be blind.
It's been a while now since you've been gone. I've had to struggle all those years that I was on my own. And since you made no attempt to be in my life, you've also been alone, so I know I'll be alright.
I've learned that life's full of ups and downs. About your family being your crutch and holding you down. Staying around, at least keeping in touch. Dad, tell me, was that asking too much? Maybe it was, I don't know, you tell me. Answer this question, huh? Why'd you fail me? Now it's too late, I've gotten too old. You wasn't there to help steer me down that road. Now that I've gotten to be a little bit older, I've realized I got a big chip on my shoulder, and I'm hurt, ready to snap on the world. And the only thing that calms me is my boy and my baby girl and my boo. That's my fam, and I'ma do all I can to be a man.
It's been a while now since you've been gone. I've had to struggle all those years that I was on my own. And since you made no attempt to be in my life, you've also been alone, so I know I'll be alright. so I know I'll be alright.